As the planar wars rages on, we can see many companies trying to get a piece of the pie and create a planar IEM that is going to redefine the market. I'm Obi from Obi Audio. Today, we are going to be looking at the TangZu X HBB Wu Heyday. Before we start, I would just like to thank Mr. Steve Tong and Mr. Kent Alfonso for managing this tour of the TangZu Heyday for me and my fellow reviewers to try. Rest assured that I will remain honest and transparent in my entirety for this review. With that out of the way, let's talk about the TangZu Heyday, starting with the unboxing experience. The box is quite massive with a beautiful artwork of who I would assume is Empress Wu Zetian of the Tang Dynasty in the front, and specifications of the Wu along with other information. Removing the sleeves and opening the box welcomes you with a nice thank you letter. Very thoughtful for TangZu to include. Removing this then reveals the beautiful presentation of the Heyday with a nice badge in the middle along with the case, which includes the cable and its multiple terminations below it. Under the foam that holds the Heyday are the included tips. The tips are pretty nice and they look pretty similar to the AET-07 and AET-08, but just like the original Wu Zetian, it has quote-unquote foam tips. Basically the same AET-07 but in medium. I don't know why TangZu still doesn't just include foam tips with the packaging of the Heyday, but honestly I don't really mind. The AET-07 like tips are pretty nice. Now, let's move on to the build and fit. The cable is a blue-colored modular 4-core silver-plated 5N OFC cable of about 1.2 meters in length. The cable is quite hefty, with each strand having quite some thickness, which assures you of how sturdy it is. As stated, the cable of the Heyday does come with a modular termination, which means you can change its termination from 3.5mm to 4.4 or 2.5 balanced. This is also very useful as the Heyday is a planar IEM and is quite hard to drive, and having a balanced output does give it just enough of a boost for it to sound more lively and smooth overall. The cable is somewhat similar to the original Wu Zetian, but in a different color, and of course it is modular. It's sturdy and has an aesthetically pleasing build that complements the Heyday very well. I never found myself having any issues with the cable, besides the fact that it can get quite hefty or heavy sometimes. And speaking of the Heyday, the driver units use a 14.5mm planar magnetic driver housed in a 5-axis CNC aluminum shell. Its overall shape is very similar to the original Wu Zetian, but the build is much better. It has a gunmetal color with a glossy overall finish. The faceplate is grooved with a very nice, auspicious design, with TangZu and HBB's logo printed near the wing. Sadly, the entire build is a fingerprint magnet, which will definitely get you wiping off your fingerprints after every use. Fit and comfort is relatively similar to the original Wu Zetian, which means that it does have those odd pressure points, and its larger size definitely won't make it fit for people with smaller ears. The larger than usual nozzle will also make it quite difficult for you to put more narrower board tips onto it, but again, if you can do that, it's honestly worth it. There is no pressure buildup on my ears, and the seal is quite good as it tends to block noise out quite well, even on noisier backgrounds. The build is a massive jump in terms of how much more premium it feels compared to the original, but some may find it too weighty. Overall, a very pretty and solid build with a modular cable to boot, but it does still have the pressure points that comes from the original Wu Zetian. Overall though, wonderful build, and honestly a massive jump up from the original Wu Zetian's build. For that, I will be giving it a score of 8 out of 10. Now, let's move on to the sound impressions. Before we proceed, the tests were done on the Venture Electronics Megatron, Zetian Wu 1, Not by VE Abigail, and the Huawei Nova 7 SE. You may also find my test tracks below along with a document explaining what you should be really looking for in each track. The Heyday has a balanced or slightly U-shaped sound signature with a tad bit of emphasis on the treble. The Heyday being planar, it does require a bit of power, so having at least a dongle deck of at least 2 VRMs is going to help your experience improve with the Heyday. Its 4.4 termination or 2.5 termination will also help it sound smoother and more energetic on the balanced output source, so definitely make the most out of its modular cable. Starting with the bass, it presents the lower frequencies with a nice clean overall presentation that doesn't go overboard, but it's not too lean sound. The sub bass is present, but it's not dominant, while the mid bass, while not the most elevated, it is very well textured, very well tuned, very well detailed. Instruments in this region don't really have the best body per se, but it does have a lot of detail and it's very cleanly done that honestly, I don't really mind that there's not a lot of nuance and personality in its bass region. I will say though, this is definitely not for bass heads or warm heads who look for a more bodied or a more bassy experience. But if you're looking for something cleaner, really good. But honestly, with how clean the bass is presented in the Heyday, the amount of texture and detail and cleanliness in its overall presentation is just enough for me to have it almost perfect. I will be giving it right now an 8 out of 10, and only if it had a bit more body in its mid-range, have a bit more rumble in the sub bass, I would honestly be confident in giving this a 10 out of 10 in its bass. Moving on to the mid-range, it's definitely on the leaner and more energetic side, with the lower mids not having as much of a body but still having a lot of detail and nuance in its vocal and instrumental tracks that have a lot of personality to it. Upper mids is also quite forward, very articulate, very detailed, but it doesn't sound all that harsh. The upper mids is really energetic to the point that female vocals and string instruments especially have this nice sparkle to it without sounding all of that harsh. Harmonics and cohesion in the mid-range is generally nice as its transient ability is consistent throughout the entire region. The leanness of the lower mids may turn some people off, especially for those who are looking for a more bodied experience, but again, just like the bass, it's a very well done and a very clean mid-range with a very energetic and a very soothing upper mid-range presentation. For that, I will be giving the mid-range a score of 8 out of 10. Moving on to the treble, there is a bit of an aggressiveness into its overall performance, but it is relatively smooth compared to a lot of IEMs that I've tried prior to this. Even on the original Wu Zetian, this feels a lot smoother and cleaner and just generally more pleasing to listen to. The lower treble carries over from the upper mid, so there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of nuance and detail without sounding all of that harsh, but I will definitely say that the transition coming from the mids all the way to the treble is just really well done. The mid treble definitely can occasionally get spicy, especially if you're sensitive to this region, but in turn it does make it a lot more articulate, a lot more detailed, and just a lot clearer and a lot cleaner. The upper treble is probably the most uneven section of the Heyday, but honestly I still found it very smooth and still very well extended, that it gives a lot of notes, especially in the higher frequencies, just this the perfect amount of energy that lingers on, you know, like guitars and vocals where they would be reaching those high notes and it just sounds so soothing and clear and just so crisp sounding. But again, it does have the tendency to get a bit too spicy, especially if you're going to be someone who is quite treble sensitive. The overall transient ability in this region is nigh and perfect, as notes just sound so clear and defined and honestly just very well detailed. For that, I will be giving the Heyday a score of 8 out of 10, as the spiciness can turn off some people, but the amount of details and technical ability in that treble region it's just insane. Moving on to the technicalities, the Heyday continues to impress with an overall impressive technical ability performance. Stage is quite expansive, especially on head stage, although depth is occasionally lacking. The width is very wide, the head stage is very expansive, and again, it only has to do with a bit of more impact in the bass region to really bring out the depth and the immersiveness of how deep you can hear instruments. Separation and imaging are also very clean, as I found it not to even struggle on my most difficult tracks. It was very defined, it was very clean, and layering was also very impressive. Overall, honestly, one of the most technically capable IEMs that I've tried in this price range. And for that, I can really give it an 8 out of 10. Moving on to multimedia and gaming, this is honestly where the Heyday excels really well at, as it is able to do micro details in the sound designs or the soundtracks of movies really well, without having really the harshness or the aggressiveness that, you know, could turn you off every time that you would hear something loud or something more expansive. It is able to depict more wider scenarios and more immersive scenarios as well really well, that I honestly found myself so I felt like I was in the movie itself. It was that good. Esports, on the other hand, isn't as impressive, as the overall tuning is definitely not catered to bring out the more nuanced sounds in esports, particularly footsteps, gunshots, just micro sounds. Regular usage is also quite nice, as it is very, very nice in terms of how it presents voice calls and YouTube videos and all that. But again, personally, I found the comfort to be quite awkward and quite painful over longer listening sessions. But again, your mileage may vary. Honestly, it's a really solid multimedia and gaming performer, with a bit of issues in terms of fitting and just generally its tuning not to be that good for more competitive scenes. But for that, I will be giving it a 7 stars out of 10. Lastly, let's compare two other IEMs. Starting with the AFO Performer 5, I've already compared this to my prior video, but if you haven't watched that, to put it short, the AFO Performer 5 is a more of a lush and soft listening experience with more of a relaxing overall tonality compared to the more articulate, more detailed, and more fun sounding Heyday. I definitely prefer the Heyday over the Performer 5, but if you're looking for something more relaxing, definitely go for the Performer 5. Next, let's compare it to the BQ-EYZ Winter, which is priced at $239, which is a whole $40-ish more than the Heyday. The Winter features a more neutral with a slight bass emphasis compared to the Heyday's more balanced, slightly U-shaped sound signature. The build on both of them are very nice, and despite the Heyday having a more sturdy and more confident build, I do prefer the Winter's build, as it is less fingerprint prone, and I just love that like somewhat kind of painted on type of texture. Obviously it's not painted on, but it just feels so nice to the touch. The lows on the Winter are less defined, but definitely more energetic, more rumbly, more immersive compared to the Heyday's cleaner but more articulate approach. Lower mids also have that somewhat heavier and warmer tonality compared to the Heyday, which again, if you prefer something warmer, the Winter definitely is going to sound better. Upper mids is more articulate on the Heyday compared to the Winter, but the Winter is more relaxing to listen to, although slightly less detailed. And for the treble, overall the treble of the Winter is smoother than the Heyday, but again, less detailed and less articulate and less head stage and less airiness compared to the Heyday. Technicalities is, I would still give it to the Heyday as much as I want the Winter to have a more technical performance. Its warmth kind of makes it less technical in a sense that it's not able to separate details as well. It's not as cleanly presented. It's not as wide or expansive as the Heyday. And lastly, let us compare it to the original Wu Zetian, which is priced at $149, a whole $50 cheaper than the Heyday. Starting with the build quality, man, it's a massive jump. The build quality of the Heyday is just so much better compared to the original Wu Zetian. But I will say that they do have, as I said earlier, the similar fit, which means similar pressure points in the ear, and you could even argue that its metal build makes it a bit more hefty in the ear compared to the original. They both have similar sound signatures, but if you've seen the graphs, it's like the Heyday is a tamer and more calm and less energetic sounding Wu Zetian. The bass is definitely more impactful on the Wu Zetian, but it's also less clean and less detailed and just generally less articulate compared to the Heyday. The mids are honestly a lot better on the Heyday, as I found that the mids were a lot cleaner, a lot more detailed, although definitely less warm and less energetic compared to the Wu Zetian. Treble is probably the smallest difference between the two, as I found both the Wu Zetian and the Heyday's treble to be quite well done, especially for a planar. It's quite smooth, it's quite energetic, but I will definitely say that the Heyday's is much cleaner compared to the original Wu Zetian, and I honestly prefer the Heyday's treble response, even though that the original Wu Zetian is a lot more elevated. And in terms of technical ability, I honestly would say they're quite similar, but Heyday definitely feels and sounds a lot cleaner compared to the original. So, overall, what do I think of the TangZu Wu Heyday? Well, before that, we shall take over the wherever it's gonna come from, the scoreboard, and you can see it's got a 41 points out of 50, which is like the highest point that I've given to any IEM in my reviews. So congratulations. First and foremost, though, if you think that the Heyday completely just wipes the original Wu Zetian out of the table, I disagree, as I still find that the Wu Zetian is a more energetic and a more fun listening experience compared to the Heyday. But if definitely the price increase is not just justified in the sound, but also in its build and also in its cable, just overall, it's cleaner, more mature, and generally just a better value in my opinion. On that note, however, the Heyday is just a complete beast in comparison to a lot of its planar contemporaries. I would say that it sounds a lot cleaner, a lot more articulate, a lot more mature sounding compared to the likes of the S12 or the Timeless. But I will definitely say that this is genuinely one of the best sounding, regardless of its driver configuration, one of the best sounding IEMs that I've tried in this price range. Not only that, but it's also one of the better built IEMs that I've felt in general, as I've honestly found that metal build to be very premium feeling, along with the modular cable and the thickness of that cable. It just feels like you're spending a lot more than $200 on the IEM. However, though, it's definitely more on the aggressive side, so if you don't like something that's articulate, something more detailed, something if you basically if you don't like aggression, if you don't like energy, especially in the upper mid-range, in the treble region, the Heyday might turn you off. But if you like something that is very technically capable, very detailed, very cleanly done, well, I guess today is the best day to get a Heyday. But honestly, I'm just really glad to what direction audio is going to, as honestly, planar has a lot of potential in becoming a leading technology in drivers and just in general transducers for not just like, you know, headphones has done it, and now IEMs is coming into the place, and it's just really interesting to see where it's going to be coming from in the future. And I really hope companies continue to be competitive in how they release and how much more technical and how much more nicely tuned IEMs can be with this configuration. And yeah, that's about the TangZu Wu Heyday. I honestly love this IEM so much that I'm actually considering getting one, but I don't know. It's I'm still trying to look for the perfect one. This isn't perfect for me yet. It's just flawed enough in my own personal preference that I am probably not gonna get it just yet. But other than that, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more of my content, please check down the links down below. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell, like this video. And with that, I'm OB from OB Audio. I'll hear you later. Ciao.